note from a Malcolm Arnold fan the other day. Inexplicable, he said, the lack of his music in the promenades this year, and this is his 80th birthday year. My correspondent said he fell out of his chair when he heard his second symphony recently by radio. So prepare to be carpeted, I'm afraid. He's composer of the week here on Radio 3 the week after next, and we're celebrating his film music right now. Big screen, of course, though this was for a documentary on machines. Wondrous sound of Malcolm Arnold's symphonic study Machines, the BBC Philharmonic, conducted by Ruman Gamba. Well, we begin the birthday celebrations for Sir Malcolm Arnold, 80 this year, composer of the week here on BBC Radio 3 the week after next. Celebrations all over the country. In the Barbican in London this weekend, they're showing some of his films. Of course, his early years were inextricably linked with film music. John Huntley is a film historian, and he worked at the Rank Studios at Denham, where Malcolm Arnold had to supply his scores, and he joins me now. John, first of all, the great question is, I suppose, why, after being so prolific and successful at writing film scores, he abruptly stopped, in the late 1960s?
Yes, I think most composers, I think of other contemporaries of his like William Arwen, Clifton Parker and so on, they realized, and then the Americans too, people like Eric Wolfgang Korngold, there came a point where they simply felt that they had done their duty by movies, they had made a good living from it, and now is the time to start taking their concert work seriously. Rather sadly, in their day, for most of them, it didn't really work. Their concert work was almost sort of totally overlooked then, and the films of course survive, and the scores from it are now constantly copied onto CD. I think that was the reason why. I think quite a number of composers had to make this very positive decision. I have done my stint in the motion picture, and of course the world was changing anyway. The concept of the great classical symphonic scores with orchestras of 60 and 70 were giving way to an electronic keyboard and a couple of guitars, so that their world changed and their attitude changed.
You wouldn't, for instance, get many people commissioning, I suspect, something like that Machines we've just heard to go, the documentary about mechanical objects.
Not today, quite at start with an enormous great orchestra. So, Malcolm, he began at age 25 in 1947, and he did so many of these films. In terms of machines, he did music for the National Coal Board, the British Petroleum Company, the British Iron and Steel Federation, the Royal Air Force, and the Metropolitan Water Board. So he became quite an expert. He made one film which was just called Men and Machines. Yeah, it was very much. And he showed right away that he had this wonderful sense of timing against things like machines. I remember one bit we did in the studios, this is back 1949, of this series. It was a film called Women in Our Time. It was part of a series called This Modern Age. It was a kind of British imitation of the American March of Time. In 1 minute 4 seconds, he had to do ballroom dancing, a flashback to ragtime, women workers in World War I, the Royal Navy at sea, a wartime blitz scene, and to round it off with women enjoying an old-time social tea party.
1 minute,
in 1 minute 4 seconds. And he did it. And I suppose that was one of the magic moments when one said, he's a man, he's going to do film music.
He can write frame to frame. Well, here is a prelude and march from something certainly was part of my childhood, all those demented young ladies that he managed to capture so well on film. It was the Bells of St. Trinian's. Look out, you'll be clobbered by a flying hockey stick. The prelude and march from the Bells of St. Trinian's, music by Malcolm Arnold, the BBC Philharmonic and Ruman Gamba. Well, you can see that film at the Barbican in London this weekend. Bring back memories for a lot of people. boarding schools, never quite like that, I don't think. John Huntley, do people associate Malcolm Arnold, do you think, now in retrospect, with that sort of humour, that sort of zany humour that's so obvious there?
Oh, there's no doubt he had that. Yes, there's two great qualities he had. Was this wonderful sense of timing with the fitting of material to the screen, which of course this was very demanding, and of course this great sense. I mean, you do get it yourself. His concert works, things like Tam O'Shanter and Becca's The Dandy Brat. There's this same element of fun really in the music, and so it was quite natural for him to do this kind of thing. And he loved to poke fun at people. I mean, the end of that bit you've just heard with these mock coders, one after the other, is really a kind of saying, you know, Marla could do it now, I can do it as well. And carry on coders that last forever. So there was this sense of humour. And it does also, that bit, show that he had a kind of, how can I describe it? He had a larger-than-life attitude to music, and he wasn't afraid to be rumbustious and noisy. And that, of course, made him absolute magic for directors like David Lean, for example, whose work, I suppose you could say, both of them were just a little bit larger than life.
Well,
Sound Barrier.
Really, well, Sound Barrier, the Bridge of the River Kwai, which we will hear in a little while.
Choice, you see, was also a bit sort of larger than life, of this great rumbustious performance by Charles Lawton. And this was wonderful. They came together. By then, things had changed, you see, because in the early scores, everything was conducted by Muir Matheson, my boss in those days, or John Hollingsworth. And gradually, Malcolm, who knew the orchestra even as well as Matheson or Hollingsworth, and had a wonderful relationship with the orchestra, realized gradually that the relationship really was with the director of the film and not through a music director as such.
So he wanted to take
over. He broke
over.
away from what we looked upon as the studio system. That's the way you did it. And particularly with people like David Lean, he created a wonderful sort of relationship. And David could say, you know, I want particular effects and particular quality. Like saying Bridge on the River Kwai, where, you know, David Lean was saying, I want a big, big march. I want, you know, Buckingham Palace. I want to the guards on parade. I want Pomp and Circumstance numbered 1 to 4, all in one piece. And Malcolm could accept this kind of bigger-than-life challenge. So when you come to the comedies like Bells of St. Trinian's, it was a gift as far as the filmmakers were concerned.
Well, here we have a very rare little excerpt, and it comes from, I think, a piece of film, which looked at him making, I think, the music for Hobson's Choice. And extraordinarily, given that he worked in this medium so long, there's very little footage and very little record of him, isn't there?
Very little footage of anybody in those days. When I consider the fact we were working in giant film studios with all the facilities, cameras and lights and so on, and I don't think one single time was there ever a film record made of an actual music recording session except this little one. And this was only done thanks to some folks in the BBC, actually. Dear old BBC said, you know, we must document these men, and so this little bit survived. And we in this case we can actually hear Malcolm in action, and again the timing thing, because he gets it slightly wrong at the end of this. Listen carefully, you'll hear that he has to have another take.
I'm much too early. We'll have to do that again because I'm much too soon on that skylight.
No, Malcolm, Arnold planned the music so that it stopped just before the branches started beating on the skylight. The music went a bit too quickly that time, with the result that they got to the stopping point too early. Now they'll try it again to see if they can fit the music more accurately.
Good, that's fine. Let's print that. Thank you very much.
He got it right in the end. One of the rare little snapshots, as it were, of Malcolm Arnold. That a film made when he was recording music for Hobson's Choice at the studios in Denham. John Huntley, were you there for that?
Yes, I was indeed, yes. You may be puzzled by it, but that's a good example of Malcolm being able to jump, because what he's got in the scene is the opening of Hobson's Choice. There's a long, sustained pan across all his shoes in the shoe shop. And first of all, you see a sort of children's shoes, and he had a little tinkly tune for that. And then there's some riding boots, and he even carried that in the music, with a little sort of a horn figure that you heard there. And then there was some ballet shoes, so he got some little sort of Swan Lake kind of sound into it. And then at the end of it, the camera swings up from the shoes onto the skylight, and you see these trees banging against the skylight. It's very sort of dramatic tension effect. And then it cuts from there as Hobson comes through the door, Charles Lawton comes to the door of the shop, and let's have a great belch, I remember. And all of Malcolm's work there, with all that kind of tremolo effect and so on, is again extremely clever. It's building actually to the performance that Charles Lawton is going to give in the scene, where suddenly, in this delicacy of these little shoes, this great big bulk of a man is going to burst upon you. So that that's basically how it's done. The only time I think anybody ever tried to document what went on.
Obviously, here on Radio 3 in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be looking at his symphonic music, but his enormous other outpouring. How do you think the film music survives? It's one of those very difficult things to take out of context, simply orally, isn't it?
It is normally, yes, and as you heard from that little piece, unless you know what the visuals are, it's almost hardly makes sense at all musically. But one thing he did do was he had this wonderful knack of writing these great marches. He comes straight down from Elgar through Arthur Bliss to his own work in Bridge on the River Kwai. I tell you one other thing he was extremely clever at, he did twice over, was mixing and counterpointing a tune, a well-known tune. For example, in Bridge on the River Kwai, Colonel Bogey is whistled by the soldiers, and he puts in a counter march to it. And in the case of In of the Sixth Happiness, this old man, and this little story there of that little tune with the children whistle and sing all the way. And as they come into the city at the end and are finally sort of salvaged, he brings in this wonderful, joyous sound as a counter effect to the little traditional tune. He did that twice over in films. It just is, again, an extension of one admires his skill. I suppose in terms of the survival of the film music, yes, the marches are still very strong indeed. And of course, for Bridge on the River Kwai, he won the Academy Award.
Absolutely. Well, you'll just have to whistle at home, I'm afraid. The original tune, which was Colonel Bogey, written by Kenneth Alford, I think in about 1914. We're just going to hear, I think, what Malcolm Arnold did, but it stands very nicely in its own, doesn't it?
Yes.
It does.
Yes,
John.
it's counter to the Colonel Bogey tune. And it's the end play-out theme as well, this great march. And remember what David Lee wanted there. He wanted something that was very near to being ironic, a bit over the top, a bit too Elgar-ish by half. And he actually wrote that in a memo, I remember, to Malcolm Arnold. And Malcolm Arnold came up with this rather marvellous march.
from the bridge of the River Kwai. Of course, David Lean's film, music by Malcolm Arnold, played there by the BBC Philharmonic under Rumen Gamba. No, it's played by the London Symphony Orchestra under Richard Hickox. I do smite my breast in contrition. We're just getting carried away whistling Colonel Bogey. I hope you were giving that its filmic counterpoint as it deserved. I'm sure you were, wherever you were. 14 minutes to 7 is the time. Arnold was 80 yesterday. Big celebrations in Northampton, quite rightly, of course. Symphonic praise from the BBC Philharmonic at 7:30 live from Manchester. A more intimate tribute from my next guests who are limbering up for a concert tomorrow. A diverse set they are, but we are going to get, first of all, Richard Shaw at the piano and Madeline Mitchell on the violin with the violin sonata. So, Madeline, do tell us, because people will know some of Malcolm Arnold's work, but not all. They know the film music maybe some of the symphonies. Where does the violin sonata lie?
Well, it's a lovely little piece from 1957 in one movement, and I played it last week in New York for the Festival UK in NY, Modern Britain in New York, at the Lincoln Center, a recital of 20th century British music, and they seem to like it.
So it's how would you describe it in sort of in the scheme of things?
It's a one movement piece in 3 sections with a lively scherzo in the middle, framed by a rather wistful opening and then an adagio at the end.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. Madeline Mitchell now seizing her violin, which is tuned earlier, but do tune again to make sure you're absolutely in accord with the pianoforte. Madeline Mitchell on violin and Richard Shaw on piano. And the short violin sonata by our birthday dedicatee, Malcolm Arnold. Thank you. Madeline Mitchell and Richard Shaw with the violin sonata by Malcolm Arnold. Getting a thumbs up from our next guest, Nicholas Daniels. It's a who's who of our players tonight, clutching his famous oboe. Very nice, isn't it? I didn't know that at all.
It's a wonderful, almost like a musical coup de théâtre at the end when he changes the colour and the sound. It's beautiful. That was really enjoyable. Thank you.
Round of applause.
Yes, definitely.
I mean, are you very familiar with a lot of the Malcolm Arnold music?
No, I'm not. I mean, I know some of the symphonies. I know some of the chamber pieces. We've played the wind quintet a lot with our Hafner Wind Ensemble and the trio. And our concert on Thursday at the Wigmore Hall, to which you're all warmly invited, those of you listening, we're playing, there's a brass quintet, there's a string quartet number 2 that I don't know at all, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the Magini Quartet will play it, who are good friends of ours. And there's other excellent things. There's flute fantasy, the clarinet fantasy, and the oboe fantasy, which were all written for the Birmingham Wind competition, which threw up James Galway and Maurice Borg, who both won first prizes 1967. And Very Sweet Sonatina, which Richard and I are going to play, which actually was orchestrated into a concertino, which I was pleased to make the first recording of, which is very sweet. Malcolm had a look at it and checked that he enjoyed. Roger Steptoe did the arrangement, and Malcolm had a look at it because it was done after he'd sort of finished composing, really.
Well, belated celebrations in many ways, because he's someone who I think has been overlooked, and Richard Shaw is responsible for putting the programme together for the Wigmore. This is the more intimate side of his oeuvre, which I suspect is the side that people are least familiar with.
I'm sure that's true, but I think if you listen beneath the surface of a lot of the pieces, and some of the pieces we're playing today, there's a bigger, stronger character waiting to come out, and that seems to be almost battling the lyrical, the tender side of Malcolm Arnold. And I'm sure that's, from what people say, that's exactly how Malcolm is himself.
How did you decide what to put? How many works did you go through to?
If you want the
present
honest
this week?
answer, it was an impossible task,
Yeah.
because actually there are so many works we haven't managed to put in. A lot I didn't know. I was just bowled over by the second string quartet, and I just felt we had to include that. And Nick's mentioned the first of the 2 brass quintets, which I think is a masterwork. So we had to put them in, and really the living room floor is just being covered in cards, one per piece. And it's been a question of finding a passage through styles or contrasts. Very difficult job, and I feel very guilty missing out some favourite works. But it's
Well, you started.
impossible.
You can keep going. You can make it a sort of permanent series. Are you all ready to go, Nick, or not?
Yeah,
You're checking your reed. He was just sort of wetting his
I was
reed.
licking it.
Well,
because
you
it
know,
has to be moist. you
All
see.
good professionals make sure it's right. You do whatever is right and proper for you to make a honey tone. Lovely. The opening of the Sonatina for oboe and piano, Nicholas Daniel and Richard Shaw. Well, Mr. Ian Partridge is next. Ian, come and say hello. We're not to overtire your voice because it has to be spared for tomorrow. So it's like the beauty parade of the famous coming through here. Nick's putting his oboe away. Beautiful little Sonatina. Go along and hear the rest of it at Wigmore this week. What about the songs then?
Well, I think that he's probably not known for his writing for the voice, so I hope people will find it interesting. The one we're going to do in a minute is written when he was only 16. So when he was studying with Gordon Jacob. It's very beautiful. He gets the atmosphere of the poems just right. These are poems by Humbert Wolff.
Yes. Well, by the way, I gather you did very well in Ivor Gurney. You couldn't come in last week. We had you singing Ivor Gurney most beautifully,
yes.
With Mr. Malcolm Sinclair being Ivor Gurney.
Yes.
He's obviously someone you're passionate about. What about Malcolm Arnold? I mean, now you've discovered
Well, now
the
I've
songs.
discovered it. Well, I did sing the 2 John Donne songs. We gave the first performance of those in '77. And the songs we're going to sing tomorrow come from this very early period, the middle sort of 1950s and then the 1970s.
I'm not allowed to tire his voice too much, Richard, and he's only going to sing one song. You're obviously quite a hard taskmaster with this troupe, are you?
Certainly not. No,
All done by consensus.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone, I think, has really been quite excited by the quality of the music. And a lot of people have joined the team because they've already specialised in his music. Well, as you hear, Ian. Didn't you give the first performance of a major work?
We sang in the Song of Simeon. I don't know whether it was the first performance. We did the recording of that with Malcolm in the 60s, I suppose.
Your living history.
Yes.
And so to the song. It's exceedingly short, so
Yes.
we'll just our whistles will just be gently tempted, I think, by this. And it's from 3 songs. This is Noon.
Shut your heart against the beam. Why should you heed his minstrelsy? Refuse your urgent lover rose. He does but drink the heart. And go.
It's too tempting. Very beautiful and very short. If you want to hear any more, you'll have to go along and hear them all. I can see lots of Malcolm Arnold revivals coming along. Final word from Richard Shaw before we go into the, well, I suppose the hair letting down session, because after all, for many people, Malcolm Arnold is synonymous with film scores. We think The Bridge of the River Kwai, I suppose, is the most famous, isn't it?
Yes. But he actually wrote well over, I think, 80 film scores, quite unbelievable. And the big break came because Arnold Bax had written a film score, and the music failed to arrive. It was lost in the post. And Malcolm Arnold was well known for his speed at writing, and also he has this wonderful knack of being able to sum up a character, an event, a mood. And that's clearly why he got the job, with very few days' notice to complete this film. And then the whole thing snowballed, so that then he got to work with David Lean. We're actually going to be playing music from Hobson's Choice, which is an unusual David Lean film, in the sense of those of us who are brought up on the bigger films where landscapes, everything, you see these wonderful vistas. But this is all set, pretty well all set, within the confines of a very sort of provincial, working class with aspirations house. It's a shop maker, a shoemaker, and there's a very fat, well-fed father who's very proud of himself, very pompous, and feels he's in charge. That was played by Lawton. And the young lover's his rather dim son, but dim but charming.
Nice but dim.
Nice but dim, thank you. Very, very beautifully played by John Mills. And he is sort of henpecked by his girlfriend. And eventually they do what all couples have to do, and they sort of outwit the parent. And off they go. So that this music sounds sort of ludicrous at the beginning. That's because it's father's music and it's linked up with music hall. And then we'll hear a sample, I think, of something a bit more delicate, which is linked in, I think. There's a visual shot of shoes looking as though they're doing a ballet. So that when he that's a shoe ballet.
Right, thank you for
I ought to
pointing
add,
that out.
thank you. This is in an authorised arrangement by Leslie Hogan, an American composer. And I think the combination of piano trio works very nicely. She's done a beautiful job. So that's on the first concert tomorrow night, alongside, as we've been mentioning, the second violin sonata and various others. And then Thursday has the big works, and he's also going to be given a fellowship by the British Academy of Composers and Songwriters. So Tim Rice will be along to present that. So it's a nice festive occasion.
Lovely. Well, thank you for being so festive and for ending on the festive note of Hobson's choice, Ludicrous into the Sublime. And Madeline Mitchell returns by popular demand, Mr. Richard Shaw at the pianoforte, and no less than the sublime Mr. Paul Watkins on the cello. Thank you all very much. Absolutely delicious. Thank you very much indeed to Madeline Mitchell, Paul Watkins and Richard Shaw for that little piano trio from Hobson's Choice by Malcolm Arnold. It's arranged by Leslie Hogan. You can hear much more of that. The celebrations, of course, continue. Film music tomorrow morning here on BBC Radio 3, where Malcolm Arnold is composer of the week. His birthday is celebrated, of course, as well. performance on 3 tonight. I mean, Composer of the Week is tomorrow morning. Performance on 3 is at 7:30. It's wrap-around celebrations, really. And Wigmore Hall in London tomorrow at 7:30. Piers Burton Page, our very own, who's also Malcolm Arnold's biographer, giving a pre-concert talk at 6 o'clock. Study afternoon on Thursday, and another chamber concert on Thursday evening. And thank you all very much indeed for bringing such a party atmosphere and showing so many different facets of the birthday man.